The snow had already buried the main street of Leadville, Colorado 6 inches deep when Eliza Hartwell realized her father was not coming home. She stood at the frosted window of their modest cabin on the edge of town, her breath fogging the glass as she peered into the gathering storm. December 1878 had brought an early winter to the Rocky Mountains, and the blizzard that had been threatening all day finally unleashed its fury just after noon. Her father, Samuel Hartwell, had left at dawn to check his silver claim up in the high country, promising to return before the weather turned. But the sky had darkened hours ago, and now fat snowflakes swirled in violent gusts that made it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the porch. Eliza pressed her palm against the cold window pane, her heart heavy with worry. At 22 years old, she had lived in Leadville for 3 years, ever since her father had dragged her from their quiet life in Kansas with promises of silver riches. Her mother had died of consumption 2 years before they left, and Eliza had no siblings, no other family. It was just her and her father against the world, and now he was somewhere out there in the storm. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned back to the small room. The fire in the stone hearth crackled weakly, and she added another log, watching the flames lick hungrily at the dry wood. Their cabin was sturdy enough, built from thick pine logs chinked with mud and moss, but the wind found every crack and crevice, sending cold drafts across the rough plank floor. She had prepared a stew hours ago, expecting her father home for supper. And now it sat cooling in the iron pot, the smell of venison and potatoes filling the small space. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and piling snow against the door. Eliza lit another oil lamp and placed it in the window, a beacon in case her father somehow made it back. She tried not to think about what might have happened to him. The mountains were unforgiving in winter, full of dangers that could kill a man in minutes. A fall, a twisted ankle, exposure to the cold. Any of these could be fatal when you were alone and the temperature was dropping fast. She settled into the rocking chair near the fire, her hands busy with mending work she had been putting off for days. The repetitive motion of needle and thread usually calmed her nerves, but tonight her fingers trembled, and she had to restart the same seam 3 times. Outside, the storm intensified, the wind screaming down from the high peaks with a fury that shook the entire cabin. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Eliza dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake at every sound, hoping to hear her father's familiar knock. But there was only the wind and the relentless whisper of snow against wood. She must have fallen into a deeper sleep near dawn, because she woke with a start to find pale gray light filtering through the window. The storm still raged, perhaps even worse than before. Snow had drifted halfway up the window, and when she opened the door to check, a wall of white nearly tumbled into the cabin. She forced the door shut again, her heart sinking. Her father had been out in this for nearly 24 hours now. The chances of him surviving were growing slimmer by the minute. Eliza spent the day rationing firewood and trying to keep warm. She ate sparingly from the stew, not knowing how long the storm might last or how long her supplies would need to stretch. By afternoon, the wind had become a constant roar, and snow had completely covered the lower half of the window. She felt entombed, cut off from the world. Fear crept into her chest, cold and insidious. What if her father never came back? What if she was trapped here alone? What would become of her? Leadville was a rough mining town, full of fortune seekers and rough men. Without her father's protection, she would be vulnerable. She had no claim to his mine, no legal papers proving ownership. Everything they had worked for could be lost. More than that, she would be alone in a way she had never been before, truly orphaned in a harsh land that showed no mercy to the weak. As darkness fell on the second night, Eliza allowed herself to cry. She sat on the floor near the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees, and let the tears come. She cried for her father, for her mother, for the life she had once imagined for herself back in Kansas. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she simply sat, numb and hollow, listening to the storm. She did not know what time it was when she heard the sound. At first, she thought it was just another trick of the wind, but then it came again, a heavy, deliberate thud against the door, then another. Someone was out there. Eliza scrambled to her feet, hope and terror warring in her chest. Could it be her father? Or was it someone else? Someone dangerous? She grabbed the rifle her father kept near the door and approached cautiously. "Who is there?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. A man's voice, deep and rough, answered, "Need shelter, please." It was not her father. Eliza's finger moved to the trigger, her heart pounding. "Go away. I have a gun." "Ma'am, I will freeze to death out here." The voice was strained, exhausted. "I mean you no harm. Just need to get out of this storm." Eliza hesitated, torn between compassion and caution, but she heard something in that voice, a genuine desperation that made her decision. She could not let a man die on her doorstep, no matter how afraid she was. She set the rifle within easy reach and struggled to pull the door open against the pressure of the snow. Wind and cold blasted into the cabin. And with them came a figure so covered in snow and ice that he looked more like a moving snowdrift than a man. He stumbled through the doorway, and Eliza shoved the door closed behind him, her muscles straining with the effort. The stranger stood in the middle of her small cabin, snow melting off him in rivulets, forming puddles on the floor. He was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the entire space. His heavy bearskin coat was crusted with ice, and his beard was frozen solid, making his face barely visible. But his eyes, dark and intense, found hers, and in them she saw exhaustion, relief, and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "I thought I was done for." Eliza kept her distance, her hand near the rifle. "Take off those wet things before you freeze. You can hang them by the fire." The man nodded and began peeling off layers of frozen clothing with stiff, clumsy movements. His fingers were white with cold, and Eliza could see him struggling with the buttons and ties. Despite her wariness, she could not watch him fumble helplessly. "Here, let me help," she said, setting the rifle down but keeping it close. She moved to him and began working at the frozen fastenings of his coat. Up close, she could see his face better. He was perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, with strong, carved features hidden beneath the ice-crusted beard. His skin was weathered and bronzed, the skin of a man who spent his life outdoors. When she finally got his coat off, she was struck by the sheer size of him. His arms and chest were thick with muscle. His body built like the mountains themselves, solid, immovable, powerful. He wore layers beneath the coat, a thick wool shirt, a vest, another shirt, and she helped him remove the wettest pieces. His hands were in bad shape, she noticed, red and swollen with the beginnings of frostbite. She had seen it before in the miners who came down from the high country. "Sit by the fire," she ordered, her voice gentler now that she could see he was in genuine distress. "I will get you something warm to drink." The stranger sank onto the bench near the hearth, and Eliza busied herself heating water for coffee. She added extra grounds, knowing he would need the warmth and the stimulant. While the water heated, she found clean cloths and a basin, preparing to tend to his hands and feet. "What were you doing out in that storm?" she asked, not looking at him. "Got caught," he said simply. "I was tracking an elk when the weather turned. Tried to make it back to my camp, but the snow came down too fast. Lost my bearings. I've been walking for hours, maybe longer. Lost track of time. Then I saw your light in the window." Eliza glanced at the oil lamp still burning in the window, the beacon she had set out for her father. It had saved this man's life instead. "You are a hunter?" she asked. "Trapper, mostly. Mountain man, some call me. I have a camp about 10 miles north of here, up in the high country. Name is Jacob Brennan." He paused. "I owe you my life, ma'am." "Eliza Hartwell," she replied, pouring the hot coffee and bringing it to him. "Drink this slowly. It will help." Jacob wrapped his damaged hands around the tin cup, wincing at the heat but not pulling away. Done, he drank carefully, his eyes closing in appreciation. "Best thing I ever tasted." Eliza knelt beside him with the basin of warm water. "I need to look at your hands and feet. Frostbite can take fingers and toes if it is not treated." He nodded and allowed her to take his hands, submerging them gently in the warm water. He hissed in pain as circulation began to return, but he did not pull away. Eliza worked methodically, her touch gentle but efficient. She had learned basic medicine from necessity. Living in a mining town meant treating injuries was a regular occurrence. As she worked, she studied him more carefully. Despite the beard and the weathered skin, there was something compelling about Jacob Brennan. His face had a rugged handsomeness to it, all strong angles and defined features. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, untangled and wet now, but thick and healthy. There was a quiet strength about him, a sense of competence and capability that was reassuring. "You live here alone?" Jacob asked, looking around the small cabin. "With my father," Eliza said, her voice tightening. "He went up to check his claim yesterday morning. He has not come back." Jacob's eyes sharpened with understanding. "He's caught in the storm." "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Where is his claim?" "Up near California Gulch, maybe 5 miles north of here." She looked at Jacob with desperate hope. "Do you think he found shelter? Could he survive up there?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he did not offer false comfort. "Depends on a lot of things. If he made it to the mine shaft before the worst of it hit, he could wait it out there. If he had supplies, if he could build a fire." "It is possible." Eliza blinked back fresh tears. "I should go look for him, but I cannot even get the door open more than a few inches." "This storm is not fit for anyone to be out in," Jacob said firmly. "You would die within an hour, maybe less. Your father would not want that." She knew he was right, but the helplessness was crushing. She finished tending to his hands and moved to his feet, unlacing his frozen boots with difficulty. His feet were in better shape than his hands, but still red and cold. She worked the same treatment, warming them gradually, rubbing circulation back into the tissue. Jacob watched her work with an expression of gratitude and something deeper. "You are good at this." "I have had practice. Mining towns are hard places. People get hurt." "You've been here long?" 3 years. Since 75. My father thought he would strike it rich." She smiled bitterly. "He found enough silver to keep us going, but not the fortune he dreamed of." "Most men do not," Jacob said quietly. "The mountains take more than they give." They fell into silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the howling wind. Eliza finished her ministrations and sat back, satisfied that Jacob would keep all his fingers and toes if he stayed warm and dry. "You should eat something," she said, rising to ladle some stew into a bowl. "It is not much, but it is hot." Jacob accepted the bowl gratefully and ate with the single-minded focus of a starving man. Eliza gave him a second helping, then a third, until he finally sat back with a sigh of satisfaction. "Thank you," he said. I cannot remember the last time I had a home-cooked meal." "How long have you been in the mountains?" "Most of my life. I grew up in Missouri, but I left when I was 16. That was 14 years ago. I've been trapping and hunting ever since, moving wherever the game takes me. The mountains are my home now." Eliza tried to imagine such a life, completely alone, dependent on no one. It sounded both terrifying and strangely appealing. "Do you ever get lonely?" Jacob considered the question. "Sometimes, but the mountains are good company. They do not lie or cheat or betray, they just are. There's something honest about that." She understood what he meant. The wilderness was brutal, but it was fair. It did not play favorites or make false promises. The night wore on, and despite the strange circumstances, Eliza found herself relaxing in Jacob's presence. He had a calm, steady energy that was soothing. He did not talk much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and genuine. There was no artifice about him, no pretense. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a man shaped by the wilderness, strong and self-reliant but not unkind. Around midnight, Eliza's exhaustion finally caught up with her. She had barely slept in 2 days, and her body was demanding rest. Jacob noticed her eyelids drooping. "You should sleep," he said. "I will keep the fire going and watch for any trouble." "I cannot ask you to do that. You are exhausted too." "I have been more tired and had less comfortable places to rest," Jacob assured her. "Besides, you saved my life tonight. Least I can do is let you get some sleep." Eliza wanted to protest, but she was too tired to argue. She retreated to the small alcove where her bed was tucked behind a curtain, not bothering to undress. She lay down fully clothed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and was asleep within moments. She woke several times during the night, each time hearing the reassuring sounds of Jacob moving quietly around the cabin, adding wood to the fire, checking the door. Knowing he was there, that she was not alone, allowed her to sleep more deeply than she had since her father left. Dawn came gray and dim, filtered through the snow still covering the window. Eliza emerged from her alcove to find Jacob sitting near the fire, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He looked up as she approached. "Storm is still going strong," he reported. "Maybe worse than yesterday." Eliza looked at the window, and seeing nothing but white. "How long can this last?" "Hard to say. I have seen storms like this go for 3-4 days, sometimes longer." 3 or 4 more days. Her father would never survive that long. The thought made her chest tighten with grief, but she forced herself to push it aside. She could not afford to fall apart now. "Are you hungry?" she asked, moving to the stove. "Always," Jacob said with a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. She prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of their bacon. They ate in companionable silence, and then Eliza set about the daily tasks of survival, rationing their remaining firewood, taking inventory of their food supplies, melting snow for water. Jacob helped without being asked, his presence transforming the small cabin. The tasks that had seemed overwhelming when she was alone became manageable with his assistance. As the day progressed, they talked more. Jacob told her about his life in the mountains, the places he had been, the animals he had tracked. He spoke of grizzly bears and mountain lions, of elk herds that stretched as far as the eye could see, of pristine alpine lakes so clear you could see 50 feet down. His voice took on a different quality when he talked about the wilderness, becoming almost poetic. Eliza found herself captivated, imagining the places he described. In turn, she told him about her life before Leadville, about growing up in Kansas on a small farm, about her mother's illness and death, about her father's determination to start fresh in Colorado. She told him about the challenges of living in a mining town, and the roughness and the violence, but also the sense of community that sometimes emerged among the miners and their families. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Jacob asked. "Sometimes," Eliza admitted. "But where would I go? I have no family, no money of my own. My father's claim is all we have, and it is barely enough to keep us fed and housed." "That's no way to live," Jacob said quietly. "Just surviving. It is the only way I know now." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition of shared isolation. They were both alone in their own ways, both shaped by loss and hardship. That night, as the storm continued to rage, they sat together by the fire. Jacob had found her father's checkers set and challenged her to a game. They played several rounds. Yes, and Eliza was surprised to find herself laughing at Jacob's mock dismay when she captured his pieces. It felt strange to laugh, almost wrong given her father's absence, but it also felt necessary, a small rebellion against the fear and grief threatening to overwhelm her. "You are a ruthless opponent," Jacob said, studying the board. "My father taught me well. He says never show mercy in checkers or cards." "Smart man." Jacob made his move, and Eliza immediately countered, jumping 3 of his pieces. He groaned in exaggerated defeat. "I surrender. You are the champion." Eliza smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I accept your surrender." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Then Jacob spoke, his voice low and serious. "When this storm breaks, I will go look for your father. Cheat, I know these mountains better than most. If he is out there, if there is any chance he is alive, I will find him." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. "You do not have to do that. You do not even know us." "You saved my life," Jacob said simply. "Besides, it is the right thing to do." She reached out impulsively and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you." Jacob looked down at their joined hands, and when he met her eyes again, there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip. It was just a moment, a flicker of connection, but it left her breathless. The third day of the storm dawned much like the previous 2, gray, cold, and furious. But by afternoon, Eliza noticed a subtle change. The wind seemed less violent, the snow falling less heavily. By evening, she could actually see a few feet beyond the window. "It is breaking," Jacob confirmed, standing at the door. "Should be clear enough to travel by morning." Eliza felt a mixture of hope and dread. Tomorrow they would go searching for her father, and she would finally know his fate. Part of her wanted to keep living in this strange, suspended time where he was neither alive nor dead, just missing. Once they searched, once they knew, there would be no going back. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in her alcove, listening to Jacob's steady breathing from the main room, thinking about what the morning might bring. Sometime near dawn, she got up and padded quietly into the main room. Jacob was awake, sitting by the fire. "Could not sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and sat beside him on the bench. "I'm afraid of what we will find tomorrow." Jacob nodded, understanding. Fear is natural, but not knowing is worse. Trust me on that. How do you deal with fear? I face it. I walk toward the thing that scares me. It is the only way through. Eliza absorbed this wisdom, drawing strength from his quiet certainty. They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, not talking, just being. And in that silence, something shifted between them, deepened. Eliza realized that in just 3 days, this stranger had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. His presence had transformed her loneliness into companionship, her fear into courage. When gray light finally filtered through the window, Jacob rose and began preparing for the journey. He had dried his clothes by the fire, and now he dressed in layers, methodical and efficient. Eliza packed supplies, dried meat, hard bread, a canteen of water. She dressed in her warmest clothes, her heavy wool coat, and her father's spare hat and gloves. The world outside the cabin was transformed. Snow had buried everything under several feet of pristine white. The sky was clear now, a brilliant blue that hurt to look at, and the sun sparkled off the snow like scattered diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful and deadly cold. Jacob broke trail, his powerful body plowing through the drifts. Eliza followed in his wake, struggling to keep up despite his efforts to make the path easier. The cold burned her lungs with each breath, and her legs ached from the effort of lifting them through the deep snow. They made slow progress north, following the route to California Gulch. Jacob seemed to navigate by instinct, reading the landscape in ways Eliza could not fathom. He pointed out landmarks buried under snow, a distinctive boulder, a bent pine tree, that kept them on course. After 2 hours of brutal hiking, Jacob held up his hand and pointed. "Is that the claim?" Eliza looked where he indicated and saw the crude wooden frame that marked the entrance to her father's mine shaft. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she pushed past Jacob, running the last 100 yards despite the deep snow. "Papa!" she called out, her voice echoing off the mountains. "Papa, are you there?" No answer came. The entrance to the mine was partially collapsed, snow and rocks blocking the opening. Eliza felt her hope crumbling. Jacob reached her side and assessed the situation. "Help me clear this. If he made it inside before it collapsed, he might still be alive." They worked frantically, throwing aside rocks and snow, their hands growing numb despite their gloves. After 20 minutes of exhausting labor, they had cleared enough space for someone to squeeze through. "Let me go first," Jacob said, pulling out a small lantern from his pack and lighting it. "Stay here until I call for you." Eliza wanted to argue, but knew he was right. If her father was in there, if he was dead, maybe it was better if Jacob saw first. She waited, every second an eternity, until finally Jacob's voice echoed from within. "Eliza, he's here! He's alive!" She scrambled through the opening, scraping her coat on the rocks in her haste. The mine shaft was small and cramped, but Jacob's lantern illuminated the space enough for her to see her father, huddled in the back, wrapped in blankets, barely conscious but breathing. "Papa!" She rushed to him, taking his face in her hands. His skin was cold, his lips blue, but his eyes opened at her touch. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice cracked and weak, "you should not be here. Too dangerous." "Hush," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We are getting you out of here." Jacob moved beside them, his experienced eyes assessing Samuel's condition. "He has hypothermia, but he is stable. We need to get him warm and get some food in him. Can he walk?" Samuel tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Jacob caught him easily, supporting his weight as if it were nothing. "I will carry him. Eliza, grab those blankets. But we will need them." The journey back to the cabin was even more difficult than the journey out. Jacob carried Samuel over his shoulder like a sack of grain, never faltering despite the deep snow and the added weight. Eliza followed, carrying the blankets and supplies, her heart soaring with relief and gratitude. Her father was alive. Against all odds, he had survived. By the time they reached the cabin, Jacob was breathing hard, the only sign that the journey had taxed even his formidable strength. They got Samuel inside and laid him near the fire. Eliza immediately began the process of warming him, the same techniques she had used on Jacob. She removed his wet clothes, wrapped him in dry blankets, prepared hot broth for him to sip. Jacob helped without being asked, his presence once again making the impossible possible. Together, they worked through the day, tending to Samuel, monitoring his condition. By evening, Samuel's color had improved, and he was able to sit up and eat solid food. "You saved my life," Samuel said to Jacob, his voice stronger now. "Both of you. I thought I was going to die in that mine." "Eliza is the one who refused to give up on you," Jacob said. "I just followed her lead." Samuel looked at his daughter with pride and love. "You have always been stronger than you know, girl." That night, with Samuel sleeping peacefully, Eliza and Jacob sat by the fire once more. The crisis had passed, but something had changed. The intimacy that had been building between them over the past days was now undeniable. Eliza found herself hyper-aware of Jacob's presence, of the way the firelight played across his strong features, of the quiet competence in his every movement. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go back to your camp." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose I should. Winter is the best time for trapping. The furs are thick." "But?" Eliza prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. Jacob turned to look at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "But I find myself not wanting to leave." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. "Why not?" "I think you know why." Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but sure. "These past few days with you, it has been different. Good different. I've been alone for so long, Eliza. I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to and to share space with. And now the thought of going back to that empty camp, that lonely life, it does not appeal the way it used to." Eliza felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears, born of hope rather than fear. "I do not want you to go either. I know it is foolish, we barely know each other, but I feel connected," Jacob finished for her, "like we were meant to cross paths." "Yes," she whispered, "exactly like that." Jacob raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "I'm not a man who has much to offer. I live rough, move with the seasons. I have no house, no steady income, just my skills and the mountains. But if you would have me, Eliza, I would stay. I would build us a life here, find a way to make it work." "You would give up trapping?" "Your freedom?" "It would not be giving up," Jacob said firmly. "It would be choosing something better, choosing you, choosing a home. I've been running for 14 years, Eliza, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Maybe it is time I stopped running." Eliza felt a joy so intense it was almost painful. "I would have you, Jacob Brennan. I would have you gladly." He pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. His arms wrapped around her, strong and protective, and for the first time since her mother died, Eliza felt truly safe. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other by the firelight, neither of them speaking. Words were not necessary. Everything important had already been said. The next morning, Samuel woke to find Jacob preparing breakfast and Eliza humming softly as she tidied the cabin. He looked between them, noting the new ease in their interactions, the way they moved around each other with unconscious coordination, and smiled. "So that is how it is," he said, his voice warm with approval. Eliza blushed. "Papa, Jacob and I, we have come to an understanding. I can see that, and I approve for what it is worth." Samuel turned to Jacob. "You are a good man, Jacob Brennan. You proved that when you carried my fool self down that mountain. If my daughter wants you, you have my blessing." Jacob nodded seriously. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will take care of her." "I know you will," Samuel said. "I can see it in you. You are the kind of man who keeps his word. Over the following weeks, as winter tightened its grip on Leadville, Jacob became a fixture in their small cabin. He went back to his camp one time to collect his traps and supplies, returning with everything he owned packed on his back. It was not much, some furs, his trapping gear, a few personal items, but it represented his entire life, now transplanted to this new place, this new beginning. He threw himself into making a life with Eliza and Samuel. He hunted game to supplement their food stores, used his wilderness skills to weatherproof the cabin better, and worked alongside Samuel at the mine when the weather permitted. The silver claim was modest, but with 3 people working it, they were able to extract enough ore to keep them comfortable. But it was the evenings that Eliza treasured most. After supper, she and Jacob would sit together, and talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his travels, painting vivid pictures of the places he had been. She shared her dreams, things she had never spoken aloud before. Dreams of a real home, of children, of a life built on something solid and lasting. "I want those things too," Jacob confessed one night, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the fire. "I never let myself want them before. Seemed safer to stay unattached. But you have changed me, Eliza. You have made me want things I thought were not for men like me." "What kind of man did you think you were?" she asked softly. "The kind that does not get to have a home. The kind that is always on the outside, looking in." He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he had never examined closely. "My father was a hard man, drank too much. He had a temper. When I was 16, I got between him and my mother during one of his rages. He beat me pretty badly, and I decided then I was done. I left that night and never looked back. I've been wandering ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to feel anything." "And now?" Eliza prompted gently. "Now I feel everything," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "And it terrifies me. But it also makes me feel alive in a way I never have before." Eliza turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and acceptance into the gesture. Jacob responded with a hunger that matched her own, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness given their size. They had kissed before, sweet stolen moments that left them both breathless. But this was different. This was a promise, a commitment to the future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Eliza. Let me make this official. Let me be your husband." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who passed through Leadville once a month. Eliza wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Jacob wore new clothes purchased from the general store, dark trousers, a clean white shirt, a vest. He had trimmed his beard and tied his long hair back, and Eliza thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. Samuel stood as witness, beaming with pride as he gave his daughter away. A few of their neighbors attended, rough miners and their families who had come to respect the Hartwells during their years in Leadville. It was not a grand wedding, but it was filled with genuine joy and hope. That night, in the privacy of their small cabin, Samuel having tactfully arranged to stay with a friend, Jacob carried Eliza across the threshold like she weighed nothing. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the firelight, suddenly shy despite everything they had been through together. "I love you, Eliza Brennan," Jacob said, his voice solemn. "I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Eliza replied, reaching up to cup his bearded cheek. "You walked through a blizzard and found me when I needed you most. You are my miracle, Jacob." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Eliza felt any remaining nervousness melt away. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Jacob's strength tempered by gentleness, his passion balanced with patience. He made love to her with reverence, as if she were something precious and fragile, and Eliza responded with a passion of her own that surprised them both. Afterwards, they lay entwined in the narrow bed, their bodies warm beneath the quilts, and talked until dawn about the life they would build together. "I want to give you a real home," Jacob said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Not this tiny cabin, but something bigger, something that is ours. I have been thinking, My trapping skills, they are worth something. There are merchants in Denver who will pay well for good furs, and with your father's claim producing, we could save money. In a year or two, we could build a proper house." "I would like that," Eliza said dreamily. "A house with a real bedroom and a kitchen with a proper stove, maybe a porch where we could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset." "And a nursery," Jacob added softly, "for the children I hope we will have." Eliza's heart swelled with love. "You want children?" "More than anything. I want sons to teach about the mountains, about hunting and tracking, and daughters who are as strong and brave as their mother." He paused. "Is that something you want?" "Yes," Eliza said, snuggling closer to him. "I want to fill our home with love and laughter. I want to give our children the kind of childhood that neither of us had, safe, happy, full of love." "Then that is what we will do," Jacob promised, kissing the top of her head. "Eager together." The rest of that winter passed in a blur of happiness. Jacob worked the trap lines during the day, while Eliza managed the household and helped her father with the mine when she could. In the evenings, the three of them would share meals and stories, the small cabin filled with warmth and laughter despite the cold outside. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the landscape overnight. Snow melted in rushing torrents, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the air filled with the sound of birdsong. Jacob took Eliza on long walks through the awakening wilderness, showing her the secret places he had discovered during his years of wandering. They found a meadow filled with columbines, Colorado's delicate state flower, and Jacob picked a handful for her, tucking one behind her ear. "You are more beautiful than any flower," he said, his dark eyes warm with love. Eliza laughed, feeling young and carefree in a way she had not since childhood. "You are biased, husband." "Absolutely," Jacob agreed, pulling her into his arms, "and I have every right to be." That summer, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be sure before telling Jacob. When she finally shared the news, his reaction was everything she had hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then set her down carefully, as if suddenly afraid he might hurt her. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, though she could see the answer written clearly on his face. "Yeah, happy does not begin to cover it," Jacob said, his voice choked with emotion. "I never thought I would have this, Eliza. A wife, a child, a family. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." Samuel was equally thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He immediately began making plans for the baby, talking about expanding the cabin to add more room, building a proper cradle. Jacob and Samuel worked together that summer with a new purpose, not just surviving but building something lasting. As Eliza's pregnancy progressed, Jacob became increasingly protective. He hovered over her constantly, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her do any heavy work. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Eliza could not help but be touched by his concern. "I am pregnant. Not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know," Jacob said, looking sheepish, "but you are carrying our child, Eliza, the most precious thing in the world to me besides you. I cannot help but want to protect you both." How could she argue with that? So she let him fuss, secretly loving his attentiveness even when it drove her a bit crazy. In September, true to his word, Jacob began building their house. He had saved money from selling his furs and from his share of the mine's profits, and now he poured all his energy and skill into creating the home Eliza had dreamed of. He chose a spot near town, but far enough away for privacy, on a gentle slope with a view of the mountains. Samuel helped when he could, but mostly it was Jacob's project. He felled trees and shaped logs, laid a stone foundation, raised walls with his own 2 hands. Neighbors helped with the heavy work of putting up the frame, repaying kindness the Brennans had shown them over the months. By late October, just weeks before Eliza's due date, the house was complete. It was beautiful. 2 stories, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and a large kitchen and living area downstairs. There was a stone fireplace big enough to heat the entire house, real glass windows, and the porch Eliza had wanted, facing west to catch the sunset. Jacob had even built a rocking chair for the porch, smooth and perfectly balanced. "It is perfect," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face as she walked through their new home for the first time. Jacob, it is more than I ever dreamed of. You deserve this and more, Jacob said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her swollen belly. This is just the beginning, Eliza. This is our foundation. We will fill this house with love and children and a lifetime of memories. They moved in immediately, and Eliza spent the next weeks nesting, arranging furniture and hanging curtains, and preparing the nursery for their baby. The cradle Samuel had built sat ready, lined with soft quilts Eliza had sewn. Everything was ready. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1879, a year almost to the day after the blizzard that had brought Jacob into their lives. The labor was long and difficult, but Jacob never left Eliza's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. When their baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Jacob cut the cord with trembling hands and then gathered both mother and child into his arms, tears streaming down his bearded face. "He is beautiful," Jacob whispered. "Perfect." "What should we name him?" Eliza asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. Jacob thought for a moment. "Samuel, after your father. He deserves to have his name carried on." Eliza smiled through her own tears. "Samuel Jacob Brennan, it is perfect." Little Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy under his parents' devoted care. Grandpa Samuel was besotted with his namesake, spending hours rocking the baby and telling him stories about his grandmother, about Kansas, about the early days in Leadville. The house filled with the sounds of baby laughter and cooing, with lullabies and gentle conversations. Jacob proved to be a natural father, his gentleness with the baby at odds with his intimidating size and rugged appearance. He would hold Samuel against his broad chest, the baby looking impossibly tiny in his arms, and walk the floors at night when the child was fussy. He made toys with his skilled hands, wooden blocks, a rocking horse, a miniature wagon. He sang in a surprisingly pleasant baritone, mountain songs and ballads he had learned during his wandering years. "You are so good with him," Eliza said one evening, watching Jacob cradle their sleeping son. "He is easy to be good with," Jacob replied softly. "He is ours, Eliza. Part of you, part of me. How could I be anything but devoted to him?" As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the Brennan household grew in other ways too. Jacob expanded his business, not just trapping, but also guiding wealthy sportsmen from the East who wanted to hunt in the Rockies. His knowledge of the mountains and his skill as a tracker made him much sought after, and the money was considerably better than trapping alone. The silver mine continued to produce, not a fortune, but a steady income that kept them comfortable. Between the mine and Jacob's guiding work, they were able to save money and even begin to think about the future in broader terms. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Eliza became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a sunny spring day in 1882. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew in the mountain meadows. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's dark eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she had Jacob wrapped completely around her tiny finger. "I was not prepared for this," Jacob confessed, holding his newborn daughter with an expression of awed terror. "A son, I understood. But a daughter? How am I supposed to protect her from everything?" Eliza laughed. "The same way you protect Samuel, by teaching her to be strong and smart and capable, by loving her unconditionally." "She is going to break hearts someday," Jacob said, gazing down at Rose's tiny face, "and I am going to have to let her, even though it will kill me." "That is many years away," Eliza soothed. "For now, she is just our baby girl, and she is perfect." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and hunt and read the forest. Rose was quieter, but equally determined, with a fierce intelligence that surprised and delighted them. Grandpa Samuel remained a fixture in their lives, his health still good despite his advancing years. In 1884, Eliza gave birth again, this time to twin boys they named Matthew and Marcus. The twins were a handful, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Matthew was serious and studious, while Marcus was mischievous and wild. Jacob often joked that Marcus had inherited his wandering spirit, while Matthew had Eliza's thoughtful nature. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it now rang with the noise and chaos of 4 children. Jacob added onto it again, building more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The porch became a favorite gathering place for the family, yet where they would sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset, the children playing at their feet while Jacob and Eliza rocked in their chairs, hands clasped together. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked one such evening, watching Jacob with their children. "Giving up your freedom, your wandering life?" Jacob turned to her with such genuine surprise that she knew the answer before he spoke. "Not once, not for a single moment. Eliza, you gave me a life I did not know was possible. You took a lonely mountain man and made him a husband, a father. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. How could I regret that?" "I just want you to be happy," Eliza said softly. "I am happy," Jacob assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "I am more than happy. I am blessed. Every morning I wake up next to you. Every time I watch our children play, every meal we share as a family, those are blessings I never thought I deserved. But you saw something in me worth loving, worth saving, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice." Tears filled Eliza's eyes. Even after years of marriage, Jacob could still move her with his words, with the depth of his love. "I could never regret choosing you, Jacob Brennan. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." The years passed swiftly, marked by the milestones of their growing children. Samuel at 6 helping his father trap, Rose at 4 learning to read with her mother, the twins at 2 getting into every possible mischief. Grandpa Samuel growing older but still spry, still working his claim with Jacob's help, still telling stories that captivated the grandchildren. Not in 1887, tragedy struck when Samuel Sr. fell ill. It started as a simple cough but rapidly progressed into pneumonia. Despite Eliza and Jacob's best efforts, despite calling in the doctor from town, the old man weakened quickly. He died peacefully in his sleep one spring morning, surrounded by his family, his hand held by his daughter. The loss hit them all hard, but especially Eliza. Samuel had been her last link to her childhood, to her mother, to the life before Leadville. Jacob held her through the grief, his strength a rock she could lean on. He organized the funeral, managed all the practical details, gave Eliza the space to mourn while making sure she did not fall apart. "He loved you so much," Jacob told her one night as she wept in his arms, "and he was so proud of the life you built, the woman you became. He died knowing you were happy and safe and loved. That's all any parent can hope for." "I know," Eliza sobbed, "but I miss him so much." "Of course you do, and you always will. But he lives on in young Samuel, in all our children. His legacy is not gone, Eliza. It continues through them." It was true. Young Samuel had his grandfather's stubborn determination and his love of the land. Rose had inherited his gentle wisdom. The twins had his mischievous humor. Samuel Hartwell's spirit lived on in his descendants, a living memorial more lasting than any stone marker. As the children grew older, Jacob taught them everything he knew about surviving and thriving in the mountains. Samuel became an expert tracker by age 10, able to read signs in the wilderness that most grown men would miss. Rose proved to have a gift with animals, able to gentle the wildest horse with patience and kindness. The twins, despite their opposite natures, made an excellent team, Matthew's careful planning balancing Marcus's bold action. Eliza focused on their education in other ways, teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. She made sure they understood history, geography, and science. She wanted them to have opportunities she had never had, to be prepared for whatever future they chose. "You are raising Renaissance children," Jacob teased one afternoon, finding Eliza conducting an impromptu science lesson in the kitchen. "I am raising capable children," Eliza corrected. "Children who can think for themselves and make their own way in the world. The mountains teach them survival. I teach them everything else." "Together, we teach them to be whole people," Jacob said, pulling her into his arms. "Strong and smart and kind. We make a good team, Mrs. Brennan." "The best team," Eliza agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. In 1890, when young Samuel was 11 and clearly too old to share a room with his younger siblings, Jacob built one final addition to the house, a separate cabin connected to the main house by a covered walkway. It gave Samuel the independence befitting his age while keeping him close enough for safety. The boy was thrilled, immediately claiming the space and decorating it with the trophies of his hunting expeditions, pelts and antlers and other wilderness finds. That same year brought another blessing when Eliza discovered she was pregnant again at age 34. After the twins, they had assumed their family was complete, but nature had other plans. This pregnancy was harder on her body, and Jacob worried constantly, but Eliza remained healthy throughout. Their youngest daughter, Grace, was born in early 1891 during a gentle snowfall, a contrast to the violent blizzard that had marked the beginning of their love story. She was a surprise late blessing, and her older siblings doted on her, especially Rose, who took on a protective maternal role with the baby. "Our family is complete now," Eliza said, holding baby Grace while her other children crowded around to admire their new sister. Jacob stood back surveying his family. His wife, glowing with maternal love, his children ranging from infant to nearly adolescent, all healthy and happy in his. Something tight in his chest loosened, a tension he had carried since childhood, since the night he ran from his father's house. This was what family was supposed to be. This was what home meant. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Complete." The 1890s brought change to Leadville and to the Brennan family. The silver boom was beginning to wane, though the mines still produced enough to support the community. More families moved in, bringing civilization and all its benefits and drawbacks. Schools were established, churches built, the rough mining camp slowly transforming into a proper town. Samuel, now a teenager, began to chafe at the restrictions of small-town life. He loved the mountains, loved hunting and trapping, but he also wanted to see beyond the horizon. Jacob recognized the restlessness in his son, having felt it himself at that age. "Let him go," Eliza said when Jacob expressed concern about Samuel's wanderlust. "He's almost 15 now, nearly a man. If we hold him too tightly, we will lose him completely. Better to let him explore while he knows he has a home to return to." So in the spring of 1893, Jacob took Samuel on an extended hunting trip, just the two of them, deep into the wilderness. They were gone for 3 weeks, and when they returned, Samuel seemed settled, his restlessness eased. Whatever conversations had passed between father and son in those mountains, Jacob never shared, but Samuel's attitude had shifted. He was more present, more engaged with family life, more willing to accept his place in their home. Rose, at 11, was becoming a beautiful young woman, though she seemed oblivious to her own attractiveness. She spent her days helping her mother with Grace and the household, reading voraciously and working with the horses Jacob kept. She had no interest in the frivolous pursuits of other girls her age, preferring practical skills and useful knowledge. "She reminds me of you," Jacob told Eliza one evening, watching Rose expertly bandage a cut on one of the horse's legs. "How so?" "Strong. Capable. Not interested in pretending to be something she is not," Jacob smiled. "She's going to make some man very happy someday, and I'm going to make sure he deserves her." The twins, at 9, were still a tornado of energy and mischief. They attended the new school in town but spent every free moment in the wilderness with their father, soaking up his knowledge like sponges. Matthew wanted to be a surveyor, mapping the wilderness. Marcus wanted to be a mountain guide like his father. Both dreams made Jacob proud. And little Grace, at 2, was the darling of the household, spoiled by her older siblings and grandparents alike. She had her mother's fair coloring and her father's adventurous spirit, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. "We did this," Eliza said one evening in 1895 as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was teaching the twins how to throw a knife. Rose was reading to Grace under a tree. "We built this life, this family. Against all odds, we succeeded." Jacob squeezed her hand. "You never doubted we would." "I had moments," Eliza admitted. "Dark nights when I worried we would fail, that something would take you from me, that our happiness could not last. But you were always there, always steady. You have been my rock, Jacob." "And you have been my anchor," Jacob replied. "You gave me a reason to stop running, and to build instead of just surviving. Everything good in my life started the night that blizzard brought me to your door." That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza said softly. I was so scared that night, so alone. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. They were in their 40s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard mountain living, but their love had only deepened with time. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had built a life from nothing, had created a family that was their greatest legacy. As the years continued to pass, their children grew and pursued their own paths. Samuel, at 19 in 1897, decided to attend university in Denver, wanting to study geology. He planned to return to the mountains, but with knowledge that would help him understand the land he loved on a deeper level. Jacob and Eliza were proud, though they missed him terribly. Rose, at 15, showed no interest in the young men who were beginning to notice her. She had inherited her father's love of solitude and her mother's practical nature. She talked about becoming a veterinarian, a radical idea for a young woman, but Jacob and Eliza supported her ambitions. The twins, at 13, remained inseparable despite their differences. They had their father's size and strength, already standing taller than their mother. They worked the mine with Jacob now, learning the business that would someday be theirs if they wanted it. And Grace, at 6, was attending school and proving to be brilliant, reading at a level far above her years. She had a curiosity about everything, asking endless questions that delighted her parents even when they exhausted them. In 1899, as a new century approached, Jacob and Eliza celebrated 20 years of marriage. Their children organized a surprise party, inviting everyone in Leadville who had been touched by the Brennan family's kindness over the years. The house was packed with people, all there to honor the mountain man and the woman he had walked through a blizzard to reach. I never expected this, Jacob said, clearly moved by the outpouring of affection. I'm just a trapper who got lucky. You're so much more than that, the town mayor said, standing to give a toast. You are a pillar of this community, Jacob Brennan, you and Eliza both. You have helped countless people over the years, guiding lost travelers, sharing your game during hard winters, teaching young men skills they needed to survive. You built not just a family, but a legacy of kindness and strength. We are all better for knowing you. The toast brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She had not realized how much they were valued, how their quiet acts of kindness had rippled out through the community. Jacob squeezed her hand under the table, and she knew he was equally touched. That night, after the guests had left and their children were finally in bed, Jacob and Eliza stood on their porch under a blanket of stars. 20 years, Eliza marveled. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Jacob said, pulling her close. I love you more today than I did the day we married. More than I did the night I knocked on your door in that blizzard. My love for you just keeps growing, Eliza. I did not know that was possible. I know what you mean, Eliza said, resting her head on his shoulder. Every year with you is better than the last. Every challenge we face together makes us stronger. You are my partner, my love, my home. They kissed under the stars, a tender connection that still held the passion of their early days despite 2 decades of marriage. Their love had matured like fine wine, deepening and enriching with time. As the 20th century dawned in 1900, the Brennan family stood strong. Samuel returned from university with his degree, immediately putting his knowledge to work improving their mining operation. Rose, now 18, she had been accepted to a veterinary program in Chicago, shocking everyone with her determination to pursue such an unconventional path. The twins were 20 and running their own guiding business with their father, earning reputations as skilled and reliable. And Grace, at 9, was already talking about becoming a teacher. Jacob and Eliza, now in their mid-40s, had gray threading through their hair and lines etching their faces, but they remained vital and engaged with life. Jacob still trapped and guided, though he let his sons handle more of the physical labor. Eliza still ran their household with quiet efficiency and had become a respected figure in town, someone people came to for advice and help. They had truly built something lasting. Their house stood solid on the mountain slope, a testament to Jacob's skill and determination. Their children were thriving, each pursuing their own dreams while remaining connected to the family and the land. Their love remained the foundation everything else was built on. One winter evening in 1902, as a snowstorm, gentler than the legendary blizzard of 1878 but still significant, blew outside, Jacob and Eliza sat by the fire in their living room. Their children were scattered. Samuel at the mine office reviewing assay reports, Rose home from Chicago for Christmas break, the twins in their cabin discussing next season's guiding routes, Grace upstairs reading. "Do you remember that night?" Eliza asked softly, watching the snow swirl past the window. "The night the blizzard brought you to me?" "Every detail," Jacob said, his voice warm with memory. "I remember thinking I was going to die in that storm. I remember seeing your light in the window like a star. I remember you opening that door with a rifle in your hand, so brave and fierce. I remember thinking even then, frozen and exhausted as I was, that you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I was so scared," Eliza admitted, "but something about you felt right, even from the beginning. Safe, despite your size and the circumstances. I knew, somehow, that you were not going to hurt me." "I would never hurt you," Jacob said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "You saved my life that night, Eliza, in more ways than just pulling me out of the cold. You saved me from a life of loneliness and emptiness. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Eliza corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were. Just in a different way. We found each other exactly when we needed to." They sat together in the firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, while the snow fell softly outside. Around them, their house, their home, was full of life and love. Upstairs, their youngest daughter dreamed of the future. Nearby, their older children planned and worked and lived. Their legacy was secure, built on the foundation of a love that had started during a blizzard and had only grown stronger with time. "No blizzard could keep me from you," Jacob murmured, echoing the words he had spoken on their wedding night. "Not then, not ever." "I know," Eliza said, tilting her face up for his kiss. "I have always known." The years continued their steady march. In 1905, Rose returned from Chicago with her veterinary degree and opened a practice in Leadville, the first female veterinarian in Colorado. Her parents' support had given her the courage to pursue her unconventional dream, and now she was blazing a trail for other young women. She married a fellow veterinarian in 1907, a quiet man named Daniel who adored her strength and intelligence. They built a house near her parents and immediately began filling it with rescued animals alongside their eventual children. Samuel married in 1906, choosing a schoolteacher named Margaret, who shared his love of learning. They took over the mine operation completely, allowing Jacob to finally retire from that work and focus entirely on guiding and trapping. Their first child, another Samuel, was born in 1908, making Jacob and Eliza grandparents and filling them with joy. The twins followed different paths despite their closeness. Matthew married in 1909 and became a surveyor as he had always dreamed, mapping the wilderness he loved. Marcus remained single longer, too in love with the mountains to settle down, though he eventually met a widow with 2 children in 1912 and discovered that he loved being a stepfather. Grace, their baby, grew into a brilliant young woman who did indeed become a teacher. She was passionate about education, especially for girls, and worked tirelessly to ensure every child in Leadville had access to quality schooling. She married late, at 30, to a fellow teacher, and they had one daughter whom they named Eliza. Through all these years, through all these changes and milestones, Jacob and Eliza remained the steady center of their growing family. Their house became the gathering place for holidays and celebrations, for Sunday dinners and impromptu visits. Grandchildren filled the rooms that had once held their own children, and the sounds of laughter and life echoed through the halls. In 1918, as Jacob turned 60 and Eliza turned 58, they celebrated 40 years of marriage. The celebration was even bigger than their 20th anniversary had been, with children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren in attendance. The house could barely contain everyone, but somehow they made it work, people spilling out onto the porch and into the yard despite the cool autumn air. 40 years, Samuel Jr. said, standing to toast his parents. 40 years of showing all of us what real love looks like. You two have been our model. our inspiration. Every successful marriage in this family traces back to the example you set. Thank you for loving each other so well and for loving all of us so completely." The toast brought tears to many eyes, including Jacob's and Eliza's. They had not set out to be an example to anyone. They had simply loved each other the best they knew how, day after day, year after year. But looking around at their family, at the legacy of love and strength they had created, they could not help but feel proud. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their house once more, Jacob and Eliza climbed the stairs to their bedroom slowly, feeling their age in their joints and muscles. But when Jacob took Eliza in his arms, when they kissed in the darkness, they were young again, transported back to that first winter when everything was new and terrifying and full of possibility. I would do it all again," Jacob whispered against her hair. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt or fear. I would walk through 1,000 blizzards to get to you." "You would not have to," Eliza assured him. "I would be waiting, door open, ready to pull you in from the cold." "Always?" "Always," she promised, "in this life and whatever comes after. You are mine, Jacob Brennan, and I am yours. Nothing can change that." They made love with the tenderness of long familiarity, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were unnecessary. Afterwards, they lay together in the darkness, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm. The 1920s brought more changes. Jacob finally gave up guiding completely, his body no longer able to handle the rigors of extended wilderness trips. But he remained active, hunting locally, untrapping enough to keep busy, spending time with his ever-growing family. Eliza slowed down as well, letting her daughters and daughters-in-law handle more of the cooking and hosting duties, though she remained sharp and engaged. They spent more time together, just the two of them, rediscovering the quiet intimacy of their early marriage. They would sit on the porch for hours, watching the mountains, holding hands, sometimes talking, sometimes simply being together in comfortable silence. They were old now, there was no denying it, but their love was ageless, as strong and vital as it had been 40-some years ago. In 1928, at age 70, Jacob fell ill. It started as a simple cold but settled into his lungs, and despite the best medical care available, he weakened steadily. Eliza never left his side. It is sleeping in a chair next to their bed, tending to him with the same gentle care she had shown that first night when she pulled him from the blizzard's grasp. "I am not afraid," Jacob told her one evening when they both knew the end was near. Their children had gathered, filling the house, but for this moment, it was just the two of them. "I have lived a full life, Eliza, a blessed life. I have loved and been loved. I have seen my children grow and thrive. I have held my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. I have no regrets." "I am not ready to let you go," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know how to be in this world without you." "You are the strongest person I know," Jacob said, his voice weak but certain. "You will be fine. Our children will take care of you. Our grandchildren will need you. You have so much life left to live, my love. Not without you. Everything good in my life has been with you." Jacob reached up with a trembling hand and cupped her face. "I will always be with you, Eliza. Death cannot separate us, not really. I will be in every sunset you watch from our porch, in every grandchild's laugh, in every mountain peak you see. I will be in your heart always, and when your time comes, I will be waiting for you, ready to walk with you into whatever comes next." "Promise?" Eliza whispered. "Promise," Jacob said firmly. "No blizzard could keep me from you, remember? Not even death itself." They held each other through the night, and as dawn broke on a beautiful spring morning in 1928, Jacob Brennan took his last breath in his wife's arms. He died as he had lived, surrounded by love, at peace with himself and the world. The funeral was the largest Leadville had ever seen. People came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects to the mountain man who had become a legend in his own lifetime. Stories were shared of his kindness, his skill, his unwavering devotion to his family. But the story that resonated most was the one Eliza told, of the blizzard of 1878, of a dying man who found her door, of the love that had bloomed from that desperate night. "He walked through that storm to reach me," Eliza said, her voice strong despite her grief. And he never stopped reaching for me. Every day of our life together, he was my partner, my love, my home. And though he is gone from this world, he will never be gone from my heart. Eliza lived another 12 years after Jacob's death. She remained in their house, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She spent her days rocking on the porch Jacob had built, watching the mountains he had loved, feeling his presence in every breeze and beam of sunlight. She told stories to her great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren about their remarkable grandfather, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. She taught them the values he had lived by: strength, kindness, loyalty, love. She made sure they understood that they came from something special, that their family was built on a foundation of true love. In 1940, at age 80, Eliza Brennan died peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Jacob for 40 years. Her children found her with a smile on her face, her hand outstretched as if reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her next to Jacob on the slope overlooking their house and the mountains beyond. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, they inscribed the words that had defined her life. He walked through a blizzard to reach her door, and she opened it. They loved each other until the very end and beyond. The house Jacob built still stands today, over a century later, passed down through generations of Brennans. The porch where Jacob and Eliza spent countless evenings still faces west, still catches the sunset. The mountains still stand eternal and unchanging, witnesses to a love story that began in a blizzard and lasted a lifetime. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when snow falls thick and fast, people swear they can see two figures on that porch: a large, powerful man with long hair and a woman with a gentle smile, holding hands and watching the storm together, proving that true love really does last forever. The story of the mountain man who waded through snow to reach her door became a legend in Leadville, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies that endure long after we are gone. Jacob and Eliza Brennan had built more than a house, more than a family. They had built something eternal, a love story for the ages, born in a blizzard and lasting far beyond death itself.